Okay, today we will be going over the occult technology of power. The most secret knowledge, a science which outdates history, is the science of control over people, governments, and civilizations. The foundations of this ultimate discipline is the control of wealth. Through the control of wealth comes control of public information and the necessities of life. Through the control of news media comes thought control. Through the control of basic necessities comes direct physical control of the people. Anonymous. My son, in this thin volume you will find the transcripts of your initiation into the secrets of my empire. Read them again, not for the arcane knowledge which is now second nature to you, but in order to re-experience the shock and awe you felt 20 years ago, when at the age of 30 the fabulous scope of my power was revealed to you by my trusted and now mostly departed advisors. Remember the surprise to the point of disbelief with which you beheld the invisible, delicate, but invincible change of deceit, confusion, and coercion with which we finance capitalists enslave this chaotic world. Remember the feats of will and strategy that have been required to retain our position. Then inspect your routine carefully. Your heir must be equal to and eager for the task much as you were. Choose him carefully. As I lie here, waiting for the end, I can afford to relish the thought of our empire lasting forever as I never dared while in charge. Rational power calculations, so easily disrupted by the thrills of power, are now entirely in your hands. Introduction to your initiation. My son, the time has arrived to make formal what you have confidently awaited for some years. Of all your brothers, sisters, and cousins, as well as the offsprings of my close allies, I have chosen you to be heir to my empire. All the trust funds, foundations, and accounts through which my empire is controlled shall pass into your hands upon my retirement. All my alliances, understandings, and enmities with my handful of peers around the globe shall gradually become yours. Over the next 20 years, we shall collaborate closer and closer, you and I, until we finally act as one. For 10 years, you have toured my empire in a succession of managerial assignments and are now familiar with the outward operations of my crucial banking, foundation, governmental, and think tank organizations. Until now, my advisors and I have deflected your questions as to how and if my diverse operations and holdings, which seem autonomous and even contradictory, are integrated into an organic whole to serve the dynasty's interest. The fact that you asked these questions, rejecting my carefully nurtured public image as an idle, coupon-clipping philanthropist, was a major factor in the high esteem in which I hold you. Most of your competitors found puppet leaders in any one of my organizations so awesome and gratifying that they immediately eliminated themselves from the contest for the top position which you now hold. Such men of limited visions are necessary for my success. They bend unconsciously to the subtle pressures to which I expose them. They can be led in any direction I choose by simple-minded rationalizations aimed at their vanity, without being privy to my motives, which would be short-lived secrets in their undisciplined and envious minds. Most important in your selection as my successor, however, was your psychological nature, which has been faithfully reported to me over the years by my associates, many of whom have advanced psychological training. A man in my position must have total mastery over his emotions. All actions affecting the power of the dynasty must be taken on the basis of coldly reasoned power calculations if the dynasty is to survive and prosper at the expense of its subjects and rivals. All power is impossible to those who pursue it. Its pursuit is ruled by sentimentality, love, envy, power lust, revenge, prejudice, hatred, justice, alcohol, drugs, or sexual desire. Sustained power is impossible to those who repress all their irrational longings into their subconscious, only to have them return in compulsive, out-of-control behavior that inevitably leads to their ruin. Although often clothed in the rationalizations of power calculation, Compulsive behavior is, at root, the emotionalism of a frightened child, desperately projecting his inner agony into a reality he is afraid to understand, much less master. Although you now must begin to pursue it consciously, you have already displayed the alienation from your emotional nature that is so essential to achieving real worldly power. You must recognize your emotional nature as a primitive survival mechanism that was appropriate for the jungle and perhaps useful to common men, but useless for the tasks that confront us finance capitalists. Attachment to what you do simply because you do it is the primary psychological characteristic of ordinary mortals. Such cognitive dissonance spells disaster for us. Our emotional mechanisms make our lives worth living, but is no guide to the occult arts of intrigue. So, continue to gratify your senses and emotionally fully at your leisure. As long as the empire prospers, you will have the resources to indulge in systematic gratification, which will have your irrational urges sated and therefore powerless. You will never be in the inevitable position of the middle class drivers who must, for the lack of resources, repress their emotional natures if they are to attain any power whatever during their lives. Typically, they end up taking their pleasures from the victories and cruelties of their struggle. Thus, their end ceases to be power, and they eventually defeat themselves with reckless behavior in pursuit of dominant thrills. I have brought you into seclusion with my most trusted advisers in order to inaugurate a new phase of your instruction. Your formal training in the official political economic world is now complete. This weekend will mark the beginning of your training in the occult technology of power that lurks behind outer appearances. As your tutors will explain, occult, or secret knowledge is the basis of all power in human society, so I use the word occult advisedly. It is a pristine usage. As I am sure you are aware by now, productivity in itself does not secure power and therefore does not secure the gratifications of life. After all, slaves can be productive. None of my organizations in which you serve so well are concerned with advancing the techniques of satisfying human needs and desires. Rather, all are dedicated to the surreptitious centralization of productive, but especially coercive, efforts in my hands, or in creating the intellectual climate in which such veiled control would be tolerated in the future. I destroy or paralyze productive efforts that cannot be ensnarled in my web. After a break, Professor A will take the floor in order to put finance capitalism into its full biological perspective. His short talk will be followed by similar abbreviated summaries by his 6 associates, all of whom you know well. The rest of the weekend will be devoted to forthright fielding of your questions.